Emily Parker stared at the termination notice on her datapad, her hands shaking with frustration and disbelief. After 6 years of dedicated service at the Galactic Medical Consortium's orbital station floating high above New Dallas, this was how it ended. One decision. One moment of standing up for what was right, and now she was jobless. The argument with her supervisor still rang in her ears. An alien patient had been brought in after a shuttle accident, its body mangled and broken. The creature was clearly in agony, its strange vocalizations filling the medical bay with sounds that made Emily's heart ache. She'd reached for the pain medication, the expensive kind that worked across multiple species, when her supervisor's hand had clamped down on her wrist. "That's for priority patients only," he'd said coldly. "Class 7 species don't justify the cost. Just sedate it and stabilize the vitals." Emily had looked at the suffering creature, then back at her supervisor. "You want me to knock it unconscious instead of actually treating its pain? That's not medicine. That's cruelty. That's policy, Parker. Follow it or find another job." She'd administered the proper pain relief anyway. The creature's grateful eyes had met hers as its suffering eased. 20 minutes later, security had escorted her out with a termination notice and a reputation that would follow her across the galaxy. Now, sitting in the cramped last shuttle heading back to Earth's surface, Emily felt hollow. Her savings account was nearly empty. Her apartment lease was up in 2 weeks. And every major medical facility in the system would see that black mark on her record. Gross insubordination, they called it. She called it being a decent person. The shuttle's descent was routine until the alarm started blaring. Emily pressed her face against the small window and saw it. A streak of fire cutting through the atmosphere, something tumbling and burning as it fell toward the wilderness zone outside the city limits. The object was too controlled to be a meteor, too desperate to be a normal landing. It was a crash. The shuttle pilot's voice crackled over the speakers, reporting the incident to ground control. "Standard procedure, file a report, let the recovery teams handle it in the morning, stay away from restricted zones." Emily felt her jaw tighten. Something had just crashed out there, and if there were survivors, they had maybe hours before the cold night killed them. Against every logical thought screaming in her head, Emily made a decision. When the shuttle landed at the main terminal, she didn't go home. Instead, she grabbed her emergency medical kit from her personal locker, the one thing they'd let her keep, and headed for the transit station. A hover taxi took her as far as the wilderness zone boundary before the driver refused to go further. "Lady, that's restricted territory. You go in there, you on your own." Emily paid him and started walking. The crash site wasn't hard to find. A trail of scorched earth and broken trees led her deeper into the forest. The smell of burning metal and something else, something she couldn't identify, filled the air. Her flashlight cut through the darkness until she found it. The ship was beautiful even in destruction. It wasn't like the bulky human vessels or the geometric alien craft she'd seen docking at the station. This was art, all flowing curves and shimmering metal that seemed to shift colors in her flashlight beam. And it was torn completely apart. Emily climbed through the wreckage carefully, calling out in both English and the 3 alien languages she'd learned. No response. Then she saw it. The creature was trapped beneath a collapsed support beam, and Emily's breath caught in her throat. It was like nothing she'd ever seen in any medical database or xenobiology textbook. Its body was serpentine, covered in scales that looked like living crystal, each one catching the light and throwing it back in different colors. Wings, translucent and delicate, were crumpled against its sides. The creature was huge, at least 4 meters long, but right now it looked fragile and broken. Its blood pooled beneath the debris, glowing with an eerie blue light that pulsed faintly. Emily's medical training kicked in immediately. She checked for breathing. Shallow, but present. Pulse was there too, though she had to search for it along the creature's neck, finding the rhythm under those strange crystalline scales. "Okay," Emily whispered, more to herself than the unconscious creature. "I've got you. Just hang on." She had no idea what this creature's anatomy looked like inside. No idea if human medical techniques would even work. But trauma was trauma, regardless of what species you were treating. Broken bones needed to be set. Bleeding needed to be stopped. Body temperature needed to be maintained. Emily worked through the entire night. She used her emergency medical kit, supplemented with materials from the ship's medical bay, which thankfully used universal medical standards. She carefully lifted the beam off the creature using a piece of debris as a lever. She set what she hoped were bones, feeling carefully for the breaks in alignment. She sealed wounds with biofoam, watching as it adapted to the creature's strange blue blood. She wrapped the creature in thermal blankets from the ship and her own jacket when that wasn't enough. Hour after hour, Emily worked. Her back ached from bending over. Her hands cramped from the delicate work. But slowly, gradually, the creature's breathing became stronger. The glow of its blood seemed brighter, healthier. By the time dawn light started filtering through the trees, the creature was stable. Emily sat back against a piece of wreckage, exhausted beyond measure. That's when the creature's eyes opened. They were unlike anything Emily had ever seen. Ancient was the only word that came to mind. These weren't the eyes of an animal or even a typical intelligent species. These eyes held the weight of centuries, of knowledge and experience that made Emily feel like a child in comparison. And they were looking directly at her with recognition and something that might have been gratitude. Then a voice filled her mind. Not words exactly, but meaning that bypassed language entirely. You have saved a life the universe deemed valuable. The debt is acknowledged. Before Emily could respond, before she could even process what was happening, the creature's eyes closed again, sliding back into unconscious rest. But it was different now. This wasn't the dangerous unconsciousness of critical injury. This was healing sleep. Emily sat there in the growing morning light, covered in strange blue blood, exhausted, jobless, and having just saved something that probably wasn't supposed to exist according to everything she knew about the galaxy. She had no idea that her entire life was about to change forever. Emily barely remembered the walk back to her apartment. Her clothes were stiff with dried blue blood, her body ached in places she didn't know could ache, and her mind kept replaying those ancient eyes staring into hers. She'd stumbled through her front door, collapsed onto her bed still wearing her dirty clothes, and fallen into the deepest sleep of her life. Dreams mixed with reality. She saw crystalline wings spreading across starlit skies. Heard that voice in her mind speaking words she couldn't quite understand. Felt the weight of something ancient and powerful watching her with approval. When the emergency alarms jolted her awake, Emily's first thought was fire. Her second thought was earthquake. Her third thought died completely when she looked out her window. The ships hung in the sky like impossible sculptures. 4 of them, each one massive enough to block out entire sections of the morning sun. They weren't hovering the way human ships did, with visible thrusters and obvious propulsion. These simply existed in the air, as if gravity had politely agreed to leave them alone. Their hulls seemed to be made of metal that was somehow alive, flowing and shifting in patterns that hurt to look at for too long. Crystal structures jutted from their surfaces, catching the light and scattering it in colors Emily didn't have names for. Every person in her building was at their windows now. She could hear screams, shouts, the confused babble of people who had no framework for what they were seeing. Human ships were functional, blocky things. The alien vessels that visited Earth's orbital stations were geometric and cold. These ships were art. These ships were beautiful in a way that made human engineering look like children playing with blocks. Emily's door chimed. Not the harsh buzzer of her cheap apartment intercom, but a sound like crystal bells that somehow conveyed respect and patience. Her hands shook as she pulled on a clean shirt and stumbled to the door. The hallway should have been full of her neighbors, all trying to get a better look at the ships. Instead, it was empty except for 5 figures standing in a perfect semicircle outside her door. Emily's breath caught. They were tall, easily 7 feet, with builds that suggested both strength and elegance. At first glance, they looked almost human. But then the light shifted, and Emily saw their skin wasn't skin at all. Scales covered every inch of them, scales that changed color as they moved, flowing from deep emerald to sapphire blue to ruby red like liquid gemstones. Their eyes were golden with vertical pupils. Their hands ended in fingers that were just slightly too long, with nails that looked more like polished claws. The one in front, whose scales shimmered with more colors than the others, bowed so deeply that his head nearly touched his knees. The others followed instantly. When he straightened, he spoke in perfect English, though Emily could see his mouth barely moved, as if speech was a courtesy rather than a necessity. Honored Lifebinder, we have searched for you with great urgency. I am Lord Commander Thane of the Draconis Ascendancy. You have saved Crown Prince Alexander, heir to the 7-spiral throne and keeper of the ancient flame. We have come to fulfill the life debt. Emily's brain struggled to process the words. The what? I don't understand. Who are you people? The commander's golden eyes showed something that might have been surprise. You do not know of us? The Draconis Ascendancy? The first children? The eternal flame. He paused, then said a word that bypassed Emily's ears entirely and wrote itself directly into her understanding. Dragons? Emily laughed. It was either that or faint. Dragons? Like, actual dragons? Fire-breathing, treasure-hoarding, fairy tale dragons. The treasure hoarding is cultural stereotype, Commander Thane said with what might have been amusement. But yes, we are the species your ancestors remembered in myth, though we have not walked openly on Earth for 12,000 of your years. We assumed humanity had maintained the knowledge. We were incorrect. One of the other beings stepped forward, this one with scales that remained a constant silver. We are among the oldest surviving species in the galaxy, Lifebinder. We have observed the younger races for millions of years, rarely interfering, never revealing ourselves unless absolutely necessary. We thought all spacefaring civilizations knew of our existence. Emily leaned against her doorframe, feeling like the world had tilted sideways. Okay, let me get this straight. Dragons are real. They're aliens. They've been watching humanity. And the creature I pulled out of that wreck last night was your prince. Crown Prince Alexander, yes, Commander Thane confirmed. His ship experienced a critical malfunction during a covert observational mission. He crashed in your wilderness zone. By all calculations, he should have died from his injuries before rescue could arrive. You saved his life. I'm a nurse, Emily said weakly. It's what I do. I got fired yesterday, actually, for doing exactly that. The commander's scales rippled with colors Emily interpreted as anger, though she had no idea how she knew that. You were punished for preserving life? This will be addressed. But first, the life debt. You keep saying that. What does it mean? Another dragon stepped forward, older looking somehow, with scales of deep bronze. Among our people, a life debt is the most sacred of obligations. When a dragon's life is saved, particularly a member of the royal family, a debt is created that must be honored. It is not merely custom or law. It is written into the fabric of our being, into our very souls. The debt must be fulfilled, or both parties suffer spiritual agony. Emily felt her head spinning. I don't want to cause anyone spiritual agony, but I don't need anything. I just did what any decent person would do. Which is precisely why the prince chose to trust you, Commander Thane said softly. He was conscious enough to sense your intentions. You did not help him expecting reward. You helped him because you could not do otherwise. This makes the debt even more profound. The silver-scaled dragon gestured toward the window, toward the massive ships hanging impossibly in the sky. Those 4 vessels are not the payment, honored Lifebinder. They are merely the transportation. They carry the resources, the knowledge, the power necessary to fulfill whatever request you make. We await your command. Emily looked at the ships, then back at the dragon standing in her shabby apartment hallway. This is insane. This is absolutely insane. Yes, Commander Thane agreed. We imagine it must be quite overwhelming. But you should know, the entire Galactic Medical Consortium is currently in emergency session. Human governments are in chaos. 4 dragon warships appearing in human space for the first time in recorded galactic history tends to cause significant disruption. Oh God, Emily whispered. What have I done? You saved a life, the bronze-scaled dragon said gently. Everything that follows is simply the consequence of choosing compassion over convenience. We have found, in our millions of years of existence, that such choices are rarer than they should be, particularly among the younger species. Emily's legs felt weak. She slid down to sit on her floor, her back against the doorframe, staring up at these impossible beings. I need time. I need to think. This is too much. Of course, Commander Thane said, bowing again. We will wait. We are very good at waiting. But please understand, Lifebinder Parker, the galaxy is watching now. Your choice, whatever it may be, will echo far beyond this moment. The dragon stepped back, giving her space. But they didn't leave. They simply stood there in her hallway, patient as statues, waiting for a fired nurse from New Dallas to decide what came next. Emily spent 2 hours sitting on her apartment floor, trying to wrap her mind around what was happening. The dragons waited patiently in her hallway, never complaining, never showing impatience. Neighbors who tried to approach were gently but firmly redirected by what Emily could only assume was some kind of invisible barrier. She could see people's confused faces as they seemingly forgot why they'd come into the hallway and wandered back to their apartments. Finally, she stood up and faced Commander Thane. I can't accept this. I appreciate the gesture, really, but I just helped someone who needed help. That's not something that deserves this kind of response. Please, just go back to wherever you came from. Tell your prince I'm glad he's okay, and we'll call it even. The commander's scales flickered through colors Emily was beginning to recognize as concern. Honored Lifebinder, I must explain something crucial. This is not a choice. The life debt exists whether you acknowledge it or not. It is part of our fundamental nature, woven into what we are at the deepest level. If the debt remains unfulfilled, both you and Prince Alexander will experience spiritual agony. It begins as a subtle discomfort but grows into pain that transcends the physical. Neither of you would survive it. Emily felt her stomach drop. So I don't actually have a choice? You're forcing this on me? No, the bronze-scaled dragon interjected gently. You choose how the debt is fulfilled. That power is entirely yours. But the debt itself exists as a fundamental truth, like gravity or time. We cannot unmake it any more than we can unmake the stars. That's terrifying, Emily whispered. Yes, Commander Thane agreed. Which is why we rarely interact with younger species. The weight of our obligations is not something to be taken lightly. But you saved a prince of the royal bloodline. There is no avoiding what comes next. Emily paced her small living room, her mind racing. Okay. Fine. If I have to accept something, I'll take money. Enough to live comfortably. That's it. That's simple, right? The silver-scaled dragon stepped forward. We could make you wealthier than entire planetary systems. We could fill your account with resources that would make you more powerful than most governments. But Lifebinder Parker, Prince Alexander gave us permission to understand your memories, your experiences. We know this is not what you truly want. Emily spun around. You looked into my mind? Without asking me? With the prince's permission only, and only memories related to why you helped him, Commander Thane said carefully. We needed to understand your character to properly fulfill the debt. We saw your termination. We saw the patient you treated, knowing it would cost you your career. We saw years of watching beings suffer because they were deemed not valuable enough for proper care. We know what keeps you awake at night. Emily felt exposed, vulnerable. But she also felt a strange relief that she didn't have to explain. Then you know I'm just angry and tired. We know you are someone who sees suffering and cannot look away, the bronze dragon said. We know you believe healing should have no boundaries. We know you dream of a place where species and status mean nothing compared to the simple fact that someone needs help. Commander Thane gestured, and suddenly holographic displays filled Emily's living room. Let me show you what we can offer. First, wealth beyond measure. We could give you enough resources to never worry about money again, to buy anything you desire, to live in luxury for 1,000 lifetimes. The display showed vaults of shimmering currency, estates on paradise worlds, treasures that made Emily's eyes hurt. Second, power. We could make you humanity's official representative to the galactic community. You would speak for your entire species. Governments would bow to your decisions. You would shape the future of human civilization. The images shifted to show conference halls filled with alien dignitaries, all looking toward a central figure with respect and even fear. Third, knowledge. We could teach you medical techniques developed over millions of years. Treatments for diseases humanity hasn't discovered yet. Ways to heal injuries you consider impossible. Understanding of biology across thousands of species. Emily saw herself in gleaming medical facilities, her hands glowing with energy as she healed wounds with a touch, surrounded by medical texts that would take lifetimes to read. Fourth, Commander Thane's voice went cold, vengeance. The Galactic Medical Consortium wronged you. They have wronged countless others, denying care based on profit rather than need. We could reorganize them. We could ensure those who made you suffer face consequences. We could reshape the entire galactic medical system by force. The final images showed the consortium's leadership in chains, their facilities occupied by dragon forces, their power broken. Emily stared at the displays for a long moment, then waved her hand through them, scattering the holograms. No. None of that. Well, maybe some of the knowledge part, but not for me alone. She turned to face the dragons fully, and for the first time since they'd arrived, she felt certain. You want to know what I really want? I want to learn everything you can teach me about healing. Not just for myself, but for humanity. For any species willing to learn. And I want to build a hospital, a real hospital, where nobody gets turned away because they're the wrong species or don't have enough money or come from the wrong planet. A place where the only thing that matters is that someone needs help. The commander's scales began to glow brighter. You would use a life debt from a dragon prince to build a hospital. Yes, Emily said firmly. Because I'm tired of watching people suffer needlessly. I'm tired of economic viability being more important than lives. I'm tired of beings dying because someone decided they weren't worth the expensive medicine. If you dragons are as powerful as you say, help me change that. Not just for humans, but for everyone. The bronze dragon made a sound like wind chimes. In all our millions of years, in all the life debts we have fulfilled, I have never heard a request quite like this. Is it possible? Emily asked. Commander Thane's golden eyes seemed to burn within a fire. Honored Lifebinder, we could build you a medical facility that would make the consortium's flagship hospital look like a primitive clinic. We could staff it with the finest medical minds from across the galaxy. We could fill its databases with knowledge accumulated over eons. We could ensure it has resources that never run dry and technology that humanity won't develop for centuries. Then that's what I want, Emily said. Teach me. Teach us. Help us be better. The commander bowed so deeply his forehead touched the floor. When he rose, his scales were brilliant gold. The prince chose well when he chose to trust you, Emily Parker. This will be done. Construction begins immediately. Before Emily could respond, alarms started blaring from the dragon's communication devices. The silver-scaled one listened for a moment, then looked up with what might have been amusement. The Galactic Medical Consortium is demanding an explanation for our presence. They wish to know why Emily Parker is negotiating with the Draconis Ascendancy. They seem quite upset. There's more, another dragon added. The Guild of Healers has requested an immediate audience. They rarely involve themselves in politics, but 4 dragon warships appearing in human space has apparently gotten their attention. Commander Thane's scales rippled with satisfaction. Let them wait. We have more important news. Prince Alexander has awakened. His injuries are fully healed. And he is insisting on meeting his savior personally. Emily felt her heart skip. The prince wants to meet me? Yes, the commander said. And I suspect, Lifebinder Parker, that he will be very pleased with your choice. The news hit Earth's networks within hours, and from there it exploded across the entire galaxy like a supernova. A human nurse had saved a dragon prince. The Draconis Ascendancy, a species so ancient and powerful that most civilizations only knew them as myths and legends, had appeared in human space to fulfill a life debt. Suddenly, humanity wasn't just another young species struggling to find its place among the stars. They were the species that one of their own had earned the favor of dragons. Emily watched the news feeds with growing horror. Her face was everywhere. Reporters camped outside her building. Government officials were giving speeches about humanity's historic moment. Alien diplomats who had never given Earth a second thought were suddenly requesting meetings. The entire galactic community was talking about one fired nurse from New Dallas. 3 days after the dragons arrived, Emily was taken to meet Prince Alexander aboard his flagship. The ship's interior made her apartment building look like a cardboard box. Walls flowed with living light. Floors were made of something that felt solid but looked like captured starlight. Every surface seemed to shift and adapt, creating furniture and displays as needed. The prince waited for her in a chamber that could have held her entire apartment building. He stood in his humanoid form, tall and regal, with scales that shimmered through every color Emily had ever seen and several she was pretty sure didn't exist in normal physics. His eyes were the same ancient gold she remembered from the forest, but now they were clear and healthy, filled with intelligence that made Emily feel like a child. 12,000 years old, Commander Thane had told her. Young for our kind. Barely an adult. Looking at Prince Alexander, Emily found that terrifying. If this was young, what did ancient look like? The prince bowed to her, a gesture that made every dragon in the room immediately bow as well. Emily Parker. Lifebinder. Savior. I have waited with great anticipation for this meeting. His voice was like music, like wind through crystal caves, like sounds that shouldn't exist but somehow did. Emily managed a clumsy curtsy, then immediately felt stupid for it. Your Highness, I'm just glad you're okay. Alexander's eyes seemed to glow brighter. You do not understand what you did, do you? You found me broken and dying in a crashed ship. You had no equipment, no knowledge of my species, no reason to believe I was anything more than a strange creature. And yet you stayed through the night, using everything you had to save my life. That's just what you do, Emily said quietly. When someone's hurt, you help them. It doesn't matter who or what they are. But it does matter to most beings, Alexander said, moving closer. His presence was overwhelming, like standing near a star. I have observed your species for decades, Emily Parker. I have watched how you treat each other, how you treat other species. I have seen the casual cruelty, the cost-benefit analyses that reduce lives to numbers. I expected nothing different when I crashed. He reached out, and his hand, though humanoid in shape, had fingers that were just slightly too long, nails that caught light like gems. But you saw me not as a creature to categorize, not as a problem to calculate, but as a patient who needed help. You saw me, Emily Parker. You truly saw me. That is rarer than you know. Emily felt tears prick her eyes. My supervisor didn't see the patient I was fired for treating. He saw a Class 7 species, not worth the expensive medicine. I see that every day in medicine. Beings reduced to categories and price tags. Which is why your request pleases me greatly, Alexander said. Commander Thane told me you chose to build a hospital. A place where no one is denied care. When you could have chosen wealth or power, you chose compassion. Is that weird? Emily asked. It is extraordinary, Alexander replied. And it begins now. Construction of Haven Station started the next morning. Emily stood on a viewing platform in New Dallas, watching as dragon ships moved in perfect coordination high above Earth. They weren't building the way humans built, with scaffolding and cranes and months of slow progress. They were growing the station, using technology that looked like magic. Massive seed-like structures were planted in orbit. Energy flowed into them from the dragon ships, and the seeds began to expand, to unfold, to transform. Metal and crystal grew like living things, forming halls and chambers, medical bays and research laboratories. Within a week, the skeleton of the station was complete. Within 2 weeks, it dwarfed every human structure in orbit. Human contractors worked alongside dragon engineers, their eyes wide with wonder as they learned techniques humanity wouldn't develop for centuries. Medical knowledge poured into human databases. Techniques for healing species humans had never heard of. Understanding of biology that made human medicine look primitive. Ways to treat injuries that human doctors considered impossible. But not everyone was happy. The Galactic Medical Consortium saw Haven Station as a direct threat to their power. For centuries, they had controlled medical treatment across the galaxy, deciding who got care and who didn't, what treatments were worth the cost and what beings were expendable. Now a human nurse and a dragon prince were building something that could challenge their entire system. Consortium representatives appeared on every news network, their messages carefully crafted. The dragons are manipulating humanity. The life debt is a form of control. Emily Parker is a pawn in a cosmic game she doesn't understand. This hospital is a beachhead for invasion. Human governments, already nervous about dragon warships in their space, began to listen. Politicians demanded Emily appear before committees, explain herself, justify her actions. Some called her a hero. Others called her a traitor who had sold out humanity to alien interests. Protesters appeared outside her apartment building, holding signs that called her everything from a savior to a fool. Some days there were hundreds of them, chanting and shouting. Security forces had to escort her everywhere. Consortium representatives tried subtler approaches. They showed up at her door with offers. Walk away from the dragons, they said. We'll give you money, a position, anything you want. Just stop this hospital project before it destroys the established order. Emily refused every time. Then the patients started arriving. Word had spread across the galaxy that a hospital was being built where no one would be turned away. Species who had been denied care, who had traveled to facility after facility only to be rejected, began making their way to Earth. The first was a silicon-based child from a mining colony, its crystalline body riddled with decay that the consortium had deemed too expensive to treat. The parents had sold everything they owned to make the journey to Earth, hoping the rumors were true. Emily met them at the station's temporary receiving bay, still wearing her old nurse's uniform because nothing else felt right. She looked at the dying child, its crystal structure cracking and darkening, and felt the familiar fire in her chest. "We'll help," she said simply. "Whatever it takes." The dragon medical masters taught her techniques that seemed impossible. How to channel energy into healing, how to read biology at levels human senses couldn't detect, how to treat species whose very existence defied human understanding. Emily learned faster than she'd ever learned anything, driven by the patients who kept arriving. A refugee from a war-torn system with wounds that wouldn't stop bleeding because his species' blood was designed never to clot. An elderly philosopher from a species the consortium considered too primitive to waste resources on, dying from a simple infection. A trader who'd been exposed to radiation humans couldn't even detect. They came in ones and twos at first, then in dozens, then in hundreds. Every species imaginable, all sharing the same story. They'd been turned away everywhere else because treating them wasn't profitable, wasn't worth the effort, wasn't policy. Emily worked 18-hour days, learning and healing, her hands guided by dragon masters who had practiced medicine for millions of years. She wasn't a diplomat navigating political complexity. She wasn't a spokesperson defending her choices to governments and committees. She was a nurse doing what nurses do, helping people who needed help. And slowly, patient by patient, Haven Station began to prove that another way was possible. 6 months after construction began, Haven Station was ready for its grand opening. The station hung in Earth's orbit like a jewel, its crystal and metal structure catching sunlight and scattering it in patterns that made people stop and stare. It was enormous, easily 10 times the size of humanity's largest orbital facility, with medical bays that could treat hundreds of species simultaneously, research laboratories filled with technology humans were only beginning to understand, and living quarters for staff from across the galaxy. The grand opening was supposed to be a celebration. Representatives from thousands of species had requested to attend. News networks from every corner of the galaxy were broadcasting live. Ships filled the space around Earth, all waiting to witness what many were calling the most significant medical facility ever built. Then the Galactic Medical Consortium filed their legal challenge. They claimed Haven Station violated their charter, which gave them exclusive authority over major medical facilities in civilized space. They argued that allowing an unregulated hospital to operate would destabilize the entire galactic healthcare system. They demanded the station be shut down immediately and all its resources transferred to consortium control. The Galactic Council agreed to hear the case on neutral ground, at their headquarters on the diplomatic station orbiting the planet Centris Prime. The hearing would be broadcast across every inhabited system. Billions of beings would watch. Emily stood in her quarters on Haven Station the night before the hearing, staring at her reflection. She'd been given formal clothes for the occasion, elegant garments that cost more than her entire apartment building back on Earth. She looked like someone important, someone who belonged in galactic politics. She felt like a fraud. "I'm just a nurse," she whispered to her reflection. "I don't know how to fight legal battles with organizations that have existed for thousands of years." Commander Thane, who had become something like a friend over the past months, stood nearby. "Then don't fight their battle. Fight yours. Tell the truth. Sometimes that's the most powerful weapon there is." The council chamber was overwhelming. It was a massive spherical space where representatives from thousands of species sat in rings that curved around a central platform. Emily could see beings of every imaginable shape and size, gaseous entities contained in special suits, crystalline creatures that communicated through light, massive beings that took up entire sections, tiny beings that needed magnification to be visible. The consortium's representatives were impressive and polished. They presented charts and statistics, legal precedents stretching back millennia, arguments about maintaining order and preventing chaos. They spoke for 2 hours, their words carefully chosen, their logic seemingly unbreakable. Then it was Emily's turn. She walked to the central platform on shaking legs. Billions of beings were watching. One wrong word could destroy everything they'd built. She could feel the weight of all those eyes, all those expectations. She decided not to try being something she wasn't. "My name is Emily Parker," she began, her voice small in the enormous chamber. 6 months ago, I was fired from my job at the consortium's orbital station for giving pain medication to a patient. My supervisor said the patient wasn't worth the expense because it was a Class 7 species. I gave the medication anyway because the patient was suffering, and I couldn't stand by and watch that happen. She saw some council members lean forward with interest. The consortium representatives looked uncomfortable. That same day, I saw a ship crash. I went to help because that's what you do when someone's hurt. I found Prince Alexander dying in the wreckage. I didn't know he was a prince. I didn't know he was a dragon. I just knew he was a living being who needed help, so I did everything I could to save him." Emily pulled up holographic displays, showing patient files. "This is Kristen, a 7-year-old silicon-based child. She came to Haven Station because 3 different consortium facilities refused to treat her crystalline decay. They said the treatment was too expensive for her species. She's healthy now, playing with other children in our pediatric ward." Another file appeared. "This is a refugee named Vaughn. He was injured in a war and traveled to 5 consortium hospitals. All 5 turned him away because his home world isn't part of an aligned system. We treated his wounds. His learning to walk again." File after file appeared. A philosopher denied treatment because his species was considered primitive. A trader rejected because her rare biology made treatment complicated. A child refused care because his parents couldn't afford consortium prices. Dozens of patients, then hundreds, all sharing the same story, the consortium had deemed them not worth saving. The consortium keeps talking about their charter, their authority, their rules, Emily said, her voice growing stronger. But what about the oath? What about the promise we make as healers to help those who suffer? When did we decide that some lives matter more than others? When did we start measuring the value of a life by how much profit it generates? The chamber was completely silent now. Emily could see beings in the council seats looking at the patient files, reading the stories, seeing the faces. Haven Station doesn't exist to challenge the consortium's authority, Emily continued. It exists because there are beings suffering who shouldn't have to. It exists because healing shouldn't have borders or price tags or species requirements. It exists because I believe, and the dragons who helped me build it believe, that every life has value. She took a deep breath. If that violates your charter, then maybe your charter is wrong. Emily sat down, her heart pounding. She'd probably just destroyed any chance of winning. You weren't supposed to challenge the fundamental rules of galactic civilization in front of the council. Then Prince Alexander stood. The entire chamber seemed to hold its breath. Dragons rarely spoke in galactic forums. When they did, civilizations paid attention. Alexander's humanoid form seemed to grow larger, more impressive. His voice, when he spoke, resonated through the chamber not just as sound but as something deeper, something that bypassed ears and spoke directly to understanding. The Draconis Ascendancy has observed the younger races for millions of years. We watch from the shadows, waiting to see which species might one day stand beside us as equals. We look for wisdom, for compassion, for the ability to see beyond immediate self-interest to something greater. His golden eyes swept across the council. We did not expect to find such potential in humanity so soon. Your species is young, barely into space travel, still learning your place in the galaxy. But Emily Parker showed us something important. She showed us that wisdom is not measured in years or technology or power. It is measured in choices made when no one is watching, in compassion shown to those who cannot repay it, in standing up for what is right even when it costs everything. Alexander gestured to Emily. This one being, this single human nurse, has done more to prove her species worth than centuries of diplomacy could accomplish. She saved my life not for reward, not for recognition, but because she could not do otherwise. That is the mark of a species that will endure. The chamber erupted in discussion. Council members argued, debated, consulted. Emily sat in her chair, feeling numb, unable to process what was happening. After 3 hours of deliberation, the council returned their verdict. Haven Station would remain open. Moreover, the Galactic Medical Consortium would be investigated for their practices. Any facility that denied care based on species, origin, or economic status would face severe penalties. The council mandated reforms that would reshape galactic healthcare for generations. Emily had won. The next few weeks were chaos. Haven Station's official opening proceeded with celebration across the galaxy. Medical students from thousands of species applied to study there. Donors offered resources. Species who had never worked together before collaborated in the station's halls. Emily became chief of staff, overseeing a facility that employed doctors from civilizations millions of years old alongside fresh human medical graduates. She watched humans learn techniques that seemed like magic, watched ancient species gain new respect for humanity's potential. One evening, 3 months after the opening, Emily stood in her office looking out at the stars. The window showed Earth below, beautiful and blue, and beyond it the endless expanse of space filled with ships coming and going, bringing patience, bringing hope. Do you regret the life you left behind? Emily turned to find Prince Alexander standing in her office doorway, his scales shifting through colors that suggested contentment. She thought about her cramped apartment in New Dallas. The job she'd lost. The simple, predictable life she'd been building. She thought about who she had been 6 months ago, tired, frustrated, wondering if anything she did actually mattered. Then she looked at her office, at the medical bay visible through another window where a team of human and alien doctors worked together to save a patient everyone else had given up on. She thought about the children playing in the pediatric ward, the refugees learning to walk again, the species who had traveled across the galaxy because they'd heard a human wouldn't turn them away. I lost a job, Emily said with a smile. But I found my purpose. I found something worth doing with my life. So no, I don't regret anything. Alexander moved to stand beside her at the window, his ancient eyes reflecting starlight. The life debt is fulfilled, Emily Parker. By law and honor, my obligation to you is complete. But if you are willing, I would like to continue our association not as debtor and creditor, but as something more valuable. I would call you friend. Emily felt tears prick her eyes. A dragon prince, a being who had existed for 12,000 years, wanted to be her friend. I'd like that very much. Below them, another ship docked at Haven Station. New patients arriving, new lives to save, new proof that compassion could reshape the galaxy. The first human-dragon partnership had begun, built not on conquest or political maneuvering, but on the simple act of one nurse who refused to let someone die alone. And as Emily Parker watched the stars, she knew that this was only the beginning. Humanity had found its place in the galaxy not through weapons or wealth, but through the oldest and most powerful force in the universe, the choice to help those who suffer, no matter the cost. She was a nurse. This was what she did. And now, with an entire galaxy watching, she would show them all what humanity could become.